Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to welcome Andy Kay to the stage with his talk on accessibility. Over to you, Andy.
You will be pleased to hear that this is not an hour-long talk. It's shorter. I might even get in a non-rigged demo at the end, but this is essentially the first talk I've ever done, I think. And I have some slides. I'm more than happy to take questions at any point. This is the intersection of some of my day job and some of my work in Debian. So, herewith, a presentation on accessibility. So, I'm Andy. I'm AMA Cater at Debian.org. I've been around Debian since 1997, something like that. I have been disabled for about the last 62 years, and I'm just about getting to live with it, but I'm really rather annoyed. I've been chasing around after physical disability issues since 1981 and the UN Year of Disabled People. I've previously run a disability advice centre. Now I'm productively employed. I help run a community for disabled folk and neurodiverse folk as part of my day job. And the other half of my day job, which is much less interesting, is annoying developers by asking them to write documentation to satisfy the legal requirements. More about that in a minute. So, I should have said right at the beginning, there will be some people that cannot see me, in which case I hope you can hear me. For other people who need to hear me, I hope you can see me and can lip read. So there's a bunch around disability and appropriate language for all sorts of reasons. And I'm sitting in a wheelchair, which is obvious. It's easy to recognize. I'm a rolling roadblock when I go around a building. It's an international symbol. But there are a whole host of other things that are completely invisible that are also disabling when you live with them. Things like fatigue, various invisible illnesses. I'm in a Debian developer conference. There are people who are neurodivergent. Yeah. No. The language around disability, handicap, impairments is not always helpful, and some people reject it. The legal language often says about people with disabilities, people with impairments. It's probably easier to think of people who are living in a world that isn't built for you. It's a world that's not built for me in a wheelchair. It's also a world where any of us can suddenly join an accident, an illness, some sort of condition. So it's not just somebody else's problem. Someday it might be yours. So Europe, Canada, America, Australia all have disability equality legislation. So America has the Americans with Disabilities Act. We have the Equalities Act from 2010. Canada, it's in the Canadian Charter. So there's a lot of disability equality legislation which promises a great deal, doesn't always deliver. For computers, we have W3C, Web Compatibility Accessibility Guidelines. From now on, WCAG. These are like a lot of W3C things. It's a huge committee-led thing that has gone on for years and years and years. Strictly speaking, it talks only about web browsers, web pages, and there is guidance around the edges on what to do for software, programs, other things with the graphical user interface. A lot of products produce documentation to say how accessible they are, accessibility statements on websites, or voluntary documentation, and it is strictly voluntary. I think it's the voluntary product accessibility template, which when you fill it in becomes an accessibility conformance report and tells people how accessible or non-accessible your application is. We have UK and EU government and public sector requirements that things have to comply to WCAG at various levels. I think the process for the UK legislation was started in 2016, took effect from 2019. Next year, for the EU 27 at least, there will be the European Accessibility Act, which takes the existing requirements that apply to governments and public sector bodies and applies them across a much wider sector, also including hardware, products, applications, phones, much wider, in the same sort of tone as the legislation we currently have. I think it was planned and started in 2019 to be phased in from 2022, but by next year it should be applicable across the entire EU. So accessibility overlaps with general usability, but it's not the same, because essentially it's computer usability applied to people with impairments. It's not very real world. Lots of government contracts need accessibility documents so they can cover their backsides with the lawyers. When anybody stands up and complains that your application isn't accessible, you can say, but we've already dealt with that. Here's the legislation. And so we have different standards, slightly, from different governments primarily. The Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 508, all Americans will tell you, all American companies will tell you, that's a slightly older version of WCAG. That's WCAG 2.0 from a few years ago. Canada has taken up the EU standards. The UK is currently following WCAG 2.2. There is a WCAG 3.0, but it's a few years off, and is always a few years off, and may never get here. Doesn't affect me. I don't know anybody who's got an impairment. It's not my problem, it's not my code. And we're all individuals, so everybody has individual needs. But if you can make your code, if you can make your applications better, more easy to understand, more straightforward to use, you're helping everybody, even the people that don't need it yet. And a fix for somebody that raises it, that's a fix for one person, but it fixes it for everybody. And it's a win, it's the right thing to do if you can make things better as you go. So, WCAG has this wonderful acronym and a whole bunch of guidance around it, but it has this as the core. Is something perceivable? Can you see it? Now, that's obviously for folk who are blind, low vision, visually impaired. It's for colour blindness. At least somebody in the room was saying yesterday, I think, they had particular colour vision. It's contrast. It's all the good things. Is it operable? Can you use it? Can you use it with one hand? Can you use it without a mouse? Does it make sense when you page through it? Can you tab through it? Using it keyboard only is incredibly important, because many of the screen readers, when they do this, use similar things to keyboard only. If you're completely blind, you can't use a mouse. Is it understandable? And, well, it's technical. We're all technical. But is the language correct? Does it make sense? Does it reach the right audience? Is it completely incomprehensible? And most importantly for a web application, is it robust? What happens when you zoom it? What happens when you scale it or magnify it massively? Switch on dark mode, switch on high contrast. What happens to the text that, does it reflow? I forget which desktop environment it is. Steve will know. Wastebasket. So all of these things. And so the WCAG folks have a series of personas, and they are idealized use cases. They're not very good, but they are, consider the person with cognitive issues who's getting older, who wants to use his laptop to research family history, but is finding it harder. Think about the adaptations you need for that person, or whatever. So, I don't care. Don't have any users. I don't have anybody I know who's blind. I don't have anybody I know who can't use a mouse. My stuff is entirely back end. So it is relevant to Debian. We have lots of users worldwide for Debian itself and for derivatives. And we have vanishingly small communities, some of which we may not even know about, who are affected by issues in our software. They don't raise bug reports, they don't tell us, of course. But they may be affected. If we can do a better job, it will help them and may help us. There's a Debian accessibility mailing list. The number of users is small. I think probably 20 or 30 regular posters. I don't know how many people there are behind, lurking in the background. Occasionally on Debian user, there are a couple of people with sight issues who post, who are obviously posting because Debian is the only place that cares, or they think that can possibly help them. We have software in Debian for some of the needs, but it's limited, unfortunately. So these are not necessarily things I can easily substantiate, but they've all been brought up with me. Mate, Cinnamon, I think LXDE, because you can't use late model GNOME because none of the stuff works, and it's all based on earlier GTK. And none of it works under Wayland. Maybe, maybe not. Nobody has dedicated accessibility coders. Even the companies that say they have might have a few testers, but they're not really thinking about this particular coterie of users. Software and screen readers are primarily all commercial. The testing assumptions from WCAG, which is really annoying, is spin up a Windows VM. And browser extensions are in Chrome, Edge, a couple in Firefox. So you can get extensions that will help you assess accessibility issues, but primarily it's find a specialist accessibility tester who will charge you large amounts of money and you won't solve all the problems. Voices and hardware. I mean, one of the rationale for the Debian firmware GR was a very real issue that the installer didn't work on some Intel laptops because there wasn't any sound, because there wasn't any firmware. And so you couldn't even start. The voices for eSpeak, the voice for the Debian installer are old, limited. New voices are hard to get. Most of them are extremely expensive or limited use. I have no experience with speech hardware based on Linux. I know there's at least somebody in the room who does. But voices are hard. And no, I'm not going to get AI voices put into Debian just because we could. So, this is where all my interests cross over, because I have real life. I am the how do I put it? Crash test dummy. Or I am the misguided missile. I am the person they use. Andy, can you fit in this lift? Can you fit through these doors? Is this ramp too steep? Well, all of that's easy to see from a wheelchair. None of that, thankfully, affects the way that I have to use Debian, because I have to use Debian, obviously. But I also have friends and colleagues with hearing impairment who need subtitles, who need transcripts. I have a lot of colleagues with blind, low vision issues. I have a huge number who are neurodiverse and find issues with language, find issues with the way things are expressed, find issues that things have to be exact and clear for them. So that's my real life. That's my employment. I'm in the community team, and I get to see the results of, in some sense, a bad user interface across the whole of Debian, because we tend to use email and IRC, which are asynchronous and text only and lead to misunderstandings. And it's hard. It's hard to pull the Debian community together, let alone all of the Debian users. But looking beyond that, we've got the perceptions of Debian in the outside world. So I'm going to steal the WCAG criteria. I'm going to say, how does the rest of the world see us? How do we see ourselves? And does that make something that we can work with and that others can work with? And Debian is strange because it's software and hardware and a social group and a community and all of those things. And then there are lots of other people who are around the Debian universe. Operable. Does Debian work well? For some value of well. I think it does. I think structurally we work. I think we are limited by the things we are given to work with. Is it understandable? I've been around for 30 years, so I hope I'd understand 10% of what I hear in this room. But for other people, Debian is hard. And for new users, and for outsiders, and for people coming into Debian, certainly for people wanting to be maintainers or developers, it's hard, but it's okay. And a last critical factor, we are all of us, each of us in this room, aging one day at a time, day by day. But when I look around the room, there are a lot of people that I have known for 20 years and more. And as I said, unfortunately, disability, infirmity, problems will come to all of us. If you look at the statistics for disabled people in working age, roughly from government statistics, depending on whose figures you take, it's about 14% of the population in work from ages 18 to 65. And of those, and I'm one of them because I'm living with something that I acquired from birth, about 16% acquired their infirmity or condition before the age of 16. So the people born with a severe hearing impairment, severe vision impairment, mobility impairment, whatever it might be. The rest of them, the other 84%, acquired it between 20 and 65. And once you get to 80, it's about 80% of the population who are impaired in some way or other. Once you get to 90, the figure is above 90? The answer is to get to 120, because by the time you get to 120, statistically, you'll never die. Okay, so I hope that's been useful as a set of prompts. It's been useful to me because I've explained some of the things that I have to deal with on a daily basis, and trying to tell developers that they need to fill in useless documentation to please the legal folks is really, really difficult. I might now attempt a demo. Now, I cannot guarantee this demo, so let me see. I'm going to try and use Orca and just read out what the 3 files that I give it sound like to our Orca application. And I will also, just for fun, I'll go through the accessibility tools that we have. Now, if you don't know where they are top bar in GNOME. There's a small thing that looks like a Vitruvian man. That's the accessibility tools. So, I might need a hand. Yes?
It doesn't appear unless one of them is switched on, so you have to find them in settings the first time.
Right.
Of course.
Sorry?
Of course.
So, repeating
Introduce that innovation.
repeating the comment that was said by one of the folk from GNOME maintenance who should know, he said, it doesn't work unless one of the features is already turned on.
It doesn't appear.
Doesn't appear, sorry. Doesn't appear unless one of these is already turned on. Now, I don't have any more slides, so how do I escape from...
Escape.
Right. So, then, if I shut that. Yes, quit. So, top bar.
For your information, we can't see anything that you're doing.
Because it's the second screen that's showing on the screens.
Ah,
So you might be able to mirror them somehow. There's some sort of,
yeah.
Oh, I think you've done it.
Well, no, I haven't
Oh no.
there's something going on.
done. There you go.
Right. Thank you.
Hang on. Yep. Yep.
Right. So, at the top here is the small sort of man-shaped. So, high,
It's not, so they're not.
high contrast. Let me just see if I can find a... Yes. I can see that it has changed slightly because the icons at the bottom are mostly monochrome or different colours to be slightly more visible, but it is only slight. So zoom is zoom and works. So I will try screen reader.
Reader on. Overview panel. Text D. E. R. M. Return. Allocator. Space. H. E. L. O. R. D. 40. Left shift. Plus. Return. / your first C++ program number include less I stream greater int main left parent right parent left brace std : count less quote hello world quote semi return 0 semi right brace allocator at T470 : $. L W R R S.
And for, I was going to say, for Ian and those that like Rust,
Return / this is The main function fn main left parent right parent left brace slash statements here are executed when the compiled binary is called slash print text to the console. Print left parent quote hello world quote right parent semi right brace allocator at T470:$.
Now, given that my blind colleagues will sometimes be turning the speed up to 300 words a minute to cope with reading what's on screen, it gets somewhat difficult to understand.
FR, return. Mary had a little lamb she ate it with mint sauce so everywhere that Mary went the lamb went too. Of course allocator at T400.
So, there you go.
High contrast check menu item not ticked. Zoom check menu item not ticked. Screen reader check menu item ticked.
Thank you very much indeed.
And you start off a 10.
Questions?
Yes.
So this all works remarkably well, actually, in a lot of the desktop environments. A lot of us are writing various different applications, maintaining packages. Do you have any checklists of if this is a GUI application we should be looking at, if this is a text-based application? These are things we could consider, and we can all sit there and go through for the packages we maintain and work our way through a checklist of this is things we don't necessarily know whether it's going to work or not, but these are things we should consider, how we consider it, what are our recommendations and best practices. Do we have those anywhere?
So that's one of the purposes behind the standardized accessibility conformance report, and that lays down various tests, and you put against it, I have tested this and it supports, partially supports, or does not support. So the WCAG standards also include templates, and when I put the URLs on here, I will put the references, but they are only as good as the person doing the testing. And there's nothing to say that the accessibility report, once it's written, doesn't just become shelfware somewhere. Ideally, what you have, and I'm hopeful, I'll just go there. Oh, go away. Just go away. No, and again. What you have for large sites, like this one, are that at the bottom, you should have something like an accessibility statement. And this should be an overall view of how the website should work and the sorts of things that you should be able to do. And in this instance, it's change colors, zoom in, listen using a screen reader, but notice the 3 screen readers they suggest are all proprietary and commercial. How accessible it is. Oh, some of it is not accessible because it's not written in plain language. And the one thing I missed, which I was specifically asked to mention by the Debian accessibility list, if you are writing HTML, if you are writing CSS, please make sure that headers are in correct order, so H1, H2, H3, and that the layout is semantically correct, because it will help the screen readers no end. So at the end, reporting accessibility problems, that's the UK government's regulations for accessibility regulations, just for fun. Oh, all the non-compliant. Now, given that this is the government website and that these people are helping set the standards, there we are. This was prepared on 23rd of September 2019. That's very convenient because that's the day the legislation came into force. And they reviewed it this year. I am very surprised indeed. Anyway, there you go. Thank you very much indeed.
We saw that.
Yes.
Just to mention inside of Debian, there is a couple of wiki pages about accessibility.
Yes.
It's for the users with tips on how to set up Debian, but there's also accessibility main. It's not an extremely long page, but it does have some tips, particularly gathered by Yuppie, as he's the main worker. So if you care about it, just have a look. I suggest you add some links there that you collected for this talk as well, because they're probably useful to link there as well.
I will do.
Another one. I recently started the Debian installer in speech mode. Well, not really recently because it has some issues with sound cards, but aside from that, there was a list of possible languages you could use to install your Debian in. I think it was 160 languages, thereabouts, and it says Chinese traditional, Chinese character, Chinese character, Chinese character, Chinese character, and stuff like that. I don't think we do a service to people trying to install it in Chinese with disabilities. Should we remove such kind of languages, or is it what would be better?
The problem is that for users that can read Chinese, that's absolutely ideal. But the Orca reader can't read Chinese. We can't deprive those users that use Chinese or Chinese traditional of an installer that works for them. But there's no guarantee that the reading application, Orca, will understand anything. And that's part of the problem. The other problem, which is interesting and has arisen, is that if you have a Braille keyboard in the installer, then at a certain point it goes to look for serial devices. If it finds serial devices, it might assume you've got a Braille keyboard installed at that point. It happens rarely, but it has happened often enough to really annoy at least one user on Debian user.
Ian.
So, yes, I mean, I definitely want to do the right thing here. I don't know what I'm doing. So, yes, please do put links on a wiki page and link to it. And then those of us who at least give a shit can know what we should do next.
Okay. Obviously, as you can see, slides are not necessarily my strong point, but there's a work in progress.
Thank you.
I was just going to grab the mic.
Anybody else? In that case, Andy?
Thank you very much for your time. It's really appreciated, and thank you.
Thank you.